Let's go ahead and move on here to discuss the course section enrollment file type and the elements that are involved in student course section in enrollment reporting in CALPADS. These again are the notable points that we want to ensure that you understand with regards to the student course section enrollment file. You'll need to coordinate again with school site staff and now with counselors in obtaining the relevant data for the student course section enrollment file and in ensuring that the data that you submit in SCSE records and CalPads accurately reflects course enrollments at your LEA. Before you submit any data to CalPads, you'll need to determine the students you must report SCSE records for in Fall 2. SCSE records are required for all courses in which students are enrolled on Census Day, which was the first Wednesday in October, and this year landed on October 2nd. If Census Day occurred when some enrolled students were in tracks that were off session, the Fall 2 submission should include the course sections and the students enrolled in those course sections scheduled on the first day that tracks are in session after Census Day. LEAs are not required to submit course enrollment data for adult classes, child center or preschool classes, before or after school childcare programs, pull out or push in instruction taught by an itinerant teacher or a pull out push in or resource teacher. Again, these use the staff job classification code of 27, unless the course section already exists in the master schedule, or for students primarily enrolled in NPS schools. Those are non-public, non-sectarian certified schools. LEAs are not required to submit student course enrollment data for lunch activities. You will also need to determine the appropriate class settings for students, whether in class, self-contained, departmentalized, independent study, or push-in pull-out. When reporting your SCSE records, ensure that the key attributes between the SCSE record and the CRSE records, the parent course section record that's associated to teachers, match in order to avoid submission errors. And this is most importantly the SE ID, so the seed needs to match in the course section and student course section records, and the course section ID needs to match between these two records. There are 5 fields in total that validate between the two, but those are the 2 most important fields to get right. And then finally, you'll need to know and be mindful of your course attributes. Course enrollments are relevant in Fall 2, and course completions are relevant in End of Year 1. Certain fields, for example, student credits earned, final grade, etc., are only relevant to course completions in End of Year 1. Student course sections for students with primary, secondary, or short-term enrollments who are active on Census Day in grades TK through 12 should be reported. The student course enrollment data should reflect students enrolled in those courses on Census Day, which this academic year was October 2nd. And again, if Census Day occurred when some enrolled students were in tracks that were off session, the Fall 2 submission should include the course sections and the students enrolled in those course sections scheduled on the first day that the tracks are in session after Census Day. And this slide shows a screenshot with course section data as well as student course section data. And student course section enrollment, or these SCSE records, represent the academic content and curriculum that a student is receiving in Fall 2 on Census Day. This is accomplished by SCSE records linking students to CRSE records that contain the academic content information. Remember, it's these course section records that are associated to teachers, which include academic content information. So your SCSE records need to link to these CRSE records with the relevant fields in order for us to know the content that's being delivered to students. And this slide again shows a screenshot in online maintenance of the SCSE record with key fields or key attributes given an alphanumeric value. Student course enrollment data provides information on the number of students enrolled in various courses on Census Day. And student course section records must have a corresponding course section record posted in CalPads prior to submitting the student course section record. So in the submission sequence, we need to make sure that the CRSE record, the course section enrollment record, is submitted and posted before we submit the SCSE or the student course section enrollment record. And the SCSE record ties to the CRSE record with the 5 attributes listed on the slide here. So all 5 of these attributes really need to match in the student course section records and their parents' course section records. And they are first the academic year ID, which if we're reporting in fall 2, this academic year should be 2024-25. The school of course delivery, this needs to match in CRSE and SCSE records. The academic term code, the course section ID, and the local course ID. So these 5 fields will tie a student course section record to a course section record. So it is very important to do your due diligence and ensure that they match in both record types. SCSE records do not include student outcome information, things like grades, units, or Carnegie units. And these are for SCSE records that are submitted in end of year. SCSE records include only data that is used to enroll students in the course section. And the SCSE 139 is a common error that triggers during the fall 2 submission. And unfortunately, it's also one of the more complicated errors to resolve. So it is in your best interest to ensure that you avoid this error in the first place, because once you receive it, resolving it will be a bit complex and will almost definitely be time consuming. The SCSE 139 triggers when a student course section record doesn't have a corresponding course section record. And usually this is because the SCSE file was submitted prior to posting the CRSE file. So we want to ensure, so on the screenshot here, we want to ensure that our CRSE file reads posted before we go on to submit our SCSE file. And the most common reason the SCSE 139 triggers is because the file status has not made its way to posted before the SCSE submission begins. And so the parent record is not in the system when CALPADS is intaking the student course section. If all records in a submission fail with this error, you should start by comparing the file status again in the CRSE file. If the file is in posted, look at the status time, and you do have a status time for these here. And compare it to the submission time for the SCSE file. If you find that the SCSE file was submitted prior to the posting of the CRSE file, you can resubmit the SCSE file. But if the CRSE file was submitted first and posted first before the SCSE submission, there may be something further going on there. But that's the best way to avoid the error, is to ensure that the CRSE file reads posted prior to any submission of the SCSE file. And that concludes our discussion of the SCSE file, the student course section enrollment file. Let's now move on to discuss English Learner Services, which is not a file type that's submitted in CALPADS in Fall 2, but it is a data submission or a data collection that occurs in CALPADS in Fall 2 using the other file type. So let's look at what English Learner Services submission looks like in Fall 2. To report English Learner Services for a student, 3 steps must be completed. And the first step is to report a student as an English learner in the Student English Language Acquisition or SELA records in Fall 1. So that should be completed already by the time you get to the Fall 2 submission. And that is the first step in reporting English Learner Services for a student, is to report the student as an English learner in a SELA record in CALPADS. The second step to report English Learner Services for a student is in course section enrollment records in Fall 2. The course section enrollment record in Fall 2 should have an education service code populated in the education service code field based on the teacher's credentials or reported with no English learner services provided. We will go over all of the potential educational service code options on the next slide. We've gotten a look at them already, but they are variations of primary, integrated, and designated English Learner Services. And then the third step to report English Learner Services to a student is to submit student course section enrollment records to associate a student to the course that has those English Learner Services attributes. So the second 2 steps in reporting English Learner Services are done in Fall 2, and the first step is to report a student as an English learner, which is done in Fall 1. But we should note that for course sections that are taught by more than one teacher, the value in the Education Service Code field should represent all of the services provided in the course section. So a combination of the services that both teachers are providing. Human resources and program staff should ensure that teachers teaching courses with English Learner Services attributes have the appropriate credentials and authorizations to provide the specified English language services. The data are provided to the California Commission on Teacher Credentialing, or CTC, to monitor whether teachers hold the appropriate authorizations to provide the specified English Learner Services. And then this slide again lists the course section enrollment record with the Education Service Code field kind of highlighted with an alphanumeric value. Education Service Code field is labeled with a 1 here. And then we see all of the different Education Service Code options below that. And there are 6 coded values that we can input here. We've already gone through them to some extent here. They are all variations on primary, designated, or integrated instruction. Designated ELD instruction is instruction that is provided during a protected time during the regular school day for focused instruction on state-adopted English language development standards to assist English learners to develop the skills necessary for academic content learning in English. So that's designated ELD. It is protected time during the regular school day. Integrated ELD is instruction in which teachers of English learners use state-adopted ELD standards in tandem with academic content standards to ensure that English learners have meaningful access to the grade level curricula in all content areas. So in integrated ELD, we're providing English learner services in tandem with standard services in the regular classroom. We are not providing protected time. So that is the difference between designated and integrated. And then primary language instruction is instruction in the student's native or primary language. Report 2.4, English Learner Education Services, Student Count Unduplicated, provides the total number of English learners at each school. And of those English learners, it provides the English Learner Education Services that they're receiving in the course sections that they're enrolled in. Students receiving multiple English Learner Services reported in only one English Learner Service based on hierarchy rules. And that's primarily because these combine. And so if you're providing multiple, you can likely logically arrive at a single code. And the CDE may monitor schools if they report students as no English Learner Services reported. So if they report courses with a code of 5 in the instructional service code field, the CDE may monitor those folks. However, if there are no English learners in the course, then we would not be providing English Learner Services, and we could populate that field with a 5 or with a 6 if we're not comfortable with the 5 there. But we should populate the Education Service Code for all courses, not just courses with English learners. This is a reference slide. As a reference, you should try to save it separately, download it, and have it handy as you're reporting, particularly your course sections and student course sections in Fall 2. So it contains the English Learner Service codes along with their detailed definition, and it should help you to populate your English Learner Services correctly. And again, there are 6 educational service codes that can be input into CRSE records to indicate English Learner Services, and their names and definitions have been provided for your reference here. A form of this table can also be found in Flash 163, so Flash 163 as well as Flash 192. So those are 2 flashes that contain this information if you're not able to reference it just using this slide deck here. It's important to ensure that you're populating the correct education service code in your course section records to indicate the appropriate English Learner Services, because the data that you populate here will end up on report 2.4 and ultimately in the English Learner Indicator on the California School Dashboard. All right, let's go move on now to discuss the final file type that we submit in Fall 2, with the Postsecondary Status or PSTS file. And this file is only expected to be submitted to CALPADS for districts who have high school students participating in a CTE program or who have participated and completed a CTE program who are surveyed in order to gather post-secondary status data points. If you're an LEA with only elementary and middle school enrollments, this section of the training may be less relevant to you, but we will try to get through it as fast as we can so that we can still provide you some value with Kyron's demonstration of error resolution, which we'll get to shortly here. These are the notable points that we want to ensure that you understand with regards to PSTS reporting. You should coordinate with counselors and with CTE staff in ensuring that the relevant completers are surveyed and that the data that you submit to CalPads is accurate for the PSTS submission. And you need to know who to survey. LEAs should survey CTE Pathway Completers as currently defined, who exited secondary education in the 23 to 24 academic year, regardless of cohort, and who were not expected to return. This should include any student who was a CTE pathway completer at any time during high school in grades 9 through 12. LEAs are able to use the local students information system to identify these students or use CalPads for this purpose. And the how to identify who should be surveyed link on this slide contains step-by-step instructions for using CalPads to identify these students. We'll also cover this in more detail in a few slides. When preparing your survey, you can use the sample survey template that's linked to on screen. You should be aware of how to populate your survey results in PSTS records, which we'll cover shortly. And you will need to be aware of the required fields for Fall 2 rather than the fields for End of Year 4. In Fall 2, we collect PSTS data for our CTE completers, and in End of Year 4, we collect PSTS data for our special education completers. And so we need to know which of those fields are relevant to CTE in Fall 2 and which are relevant to special education in End of Year 4. So who should be reported with PSTS files in Fall 2? Any student who completed high school or exited secondary education in the prior academic year, so in the 23 to 24 academic year, in grades 11 and 12, who were identified as career technical education or CTE completers, or who participated in the California Partnership Academy program, though the vast majority of PSTS records in Fall 2 will be submitted for CTE students. So when should LEAs survey students? For Fall 2, you should be surveying your students right now. LEAs should survey students in the second quarter following the end of the prior academic year, which will be sometime during December or January of the current academic year. So you should be reporting or surveying your CTE completers now. And you would report survey results in CalPads during the Fall 2 submission, which you can do beginning on December 17th. You can begin submitting records now, but you can begin reviewing snapshots, reports, and certification errors beginning on December 17th. All right, regardless of whether they received federal Perkins funding, LEAs are required to survey their CTE pathway completers. LEAs should survey CTE pathway completers who were in the 4-year adjusted cohort graduation rate, or ACGR. And this should include any student who was a CTE pathway completer at any time during high school and who exited with a school completion status code of 100, graduated with a standard high school diploma, 120, student with disabilities, certificate of completion, 250, adult education high school diploma, 320, received a high school equivalency certificate, 330, passed the CASP, or 360, completed grade 12 without completing graduation requirements, not a grad. And the post-secondary status represents the student's outcomes after leaving secondary education. So how do you identify these students? There are 2 ways to identify students who will require PSTS files submitted to CalPads and thus who will need to be surveyed. First, if you're fortunate enough to have a robust student information system and you're able to query your student's information system with parameters that meet the PSTS reporting requirements, you are able to get this information from your local students information system. And if you are able to get this from your local SIS, you are one of the lucky few, because for the majority of folks, we will need to use CalPads for this purpose. So outside of the SIS, CalPads does have a way to identify a list of students who will require PSTS files to be reported. And there are 2 reports that you'll need to run. the first thing that you'll need to find out is who your completers are. And this is done by running ODS report 8.1A for academic year 2023 to 24 to determine the students who completed high school last academic year. But within that set of high school completers, you'll also need to determine who your CTE Pathway completers are. And this is done by running snapshot report 3.20 first for academic year 2023 to 2024 to determine which high school completers completed a CTE pathway in their final year or in their senior year. And then we're going to need to run the report again for academic year 2022 to 23 to determine which high school completers completed in their junior year. And finally, a third time for 2021 to 22 to determine which high school completers completed a CTE pathway in their sophomore year. You are able to run report 3.20 a fourth time for academic year 2020 to 2021 to determine which high school completers completed a CTE pathway in their freshman year. However, CTE pathway completion in ninth grade is quite rare, and there are very few circumstances where this will apply to LEAs across the state. So you are able to do your due diligence and run report 3.20, filtering for ninth grade and academic year 2020 to 21, but this is not necessary at most LEAs. Okay, let's go ahead and get in a little bit more detail on identifying these students. So this slide shows a visual aid that's helpful for generating your PSTS student list from CALPADS reports. So first, in order to determine your high school completers, you'll need to run report 8.1A for academic year 2023 to 24. You'll do this filtering for exit reason code E230, completer exit, and completion status codes of 100, 120, 250, 320, 330, and 360. You'll also want to filter for grade levels 11 and 12 in order to cast the widest net possible for your high school completers. So this report, 8.1A, filtered as such, will give you a list of your high school completers. The next step is to determine of those high school completers, which were CTE completers. So within that high school completers group, we will run snapshot report 3.20 to determine who our CTE completers are. And here we will again filter for Perkins CTIC fundable all, and we will run the report 3 times. We'll run the report first, filtering for 12th grade and academic year 2023 to 24 to determine our high school completers who completed a CTE pathway in their senior year. We'll run report 3.20 a second time, filtering for 11th grade and academic year 22 to 23 to determine our high school completers who completed a CTE pathway in their junior year. And then we will run the report a third time, filtering for academic year 2021 to 22 and 10th grade to determine which of our high school completers completed a CTE pathway in their sophomore year. Again, we could do this a fourth time, filtering for academic year 2020 to 21 and filtering for ninth grade to determine our high school completers who completed a CTE pathway in their freshman year. But completion of a CTE pathway during a student's freshman year is incredibly rare. All right, this slide shows a screenshot of report 8.1A, which we run in order to determine our high school completers with the relevant filters highlighted on the report here. So again, with report 8.1A, we want to filter for the academic year that's prior to the current academic year. So in this case, we would actually not want to filter for what's on the slide here. We would want to filter for 23 to 24 for the academic year. We then have the grade level here, which when we're identifying our high school completers, we want to filter for both 11 and 12th grade in order to cast the widest net possible, because there are likely several students who completed high school in their junior year. So completed high school in 3 years rather than 4. So in order to ensure that those students make their way onto the list, we would filter for both 11 and 12th grade here. We would then filter for a completion status here of 100, 120, 250, 320, or 360, because those are the relevant completion statuses to exit secondary education and require a PSTS file to be reported. We want to filter for exit reason code E230, completer exit, because we are looking for our high school or post-secondary completers. And then the last two fields are going to be key to generate your list. You'll want to filter for the completion period from and through dates for the previous academic year. So we'll want to filter from August 16th, 2023 to August 15th, 2024 in order to ensure that we have the relevant students captured for the correct academic year. So this is the filtering for report 8.1a to determine your high school completers. Once we've determined our high school completers, we will need to identify which of those high school completers were also CTE completers. And this slide shows us the screenshot for report 3.20, which we will run in order to determine the CTE completers from our high school completer list. So you'll run this report and you'll filter for academic year 2023 to 24, so the prior academic year. And when you do so, you'll want to filter for Perkins CTIG fundable all, so yes and no or all. And you'll want to filter during the first time you run this report for 12th grade. This will determine who completed a CTE pathway in their senior year of high school, of your high school completers. We'll want to run the report again a second time, keeping the academic year and Perkins CTIG fundable filters the same. But simply, keeping the Perkins CTIG fundable filter the same and modifying the academic year for the year prior to this, so 2022 to 23, and then modifying the grade level for 11 to determine which of your high school completers completed a CTE pathway in their junior year. And then we'll run it a third time for academic year 2021 to 22, filtering for grade level 10 in order to determine which of our high school graduates completed a CTE pathway in their sophomore year. So those are the two reports with all of the relevant filters highlighted to identify your CTE survey student list. And again, the CDE does have a survey template for PSTS surveys that you can use to download and customize for your LEA's purposes to distribute to these students once they've been identified. And once you receive the survey results from those students, you can complete the PSTS submission. So how is this survey conducted? LEAs must establish a process to capture the post-secondary status of the specified students, but the process to capture this is determined locally. In general, LEAs have conducted some type of student survey to capture this data. And again, the student survey template is found on the CDE website. The student surveys can be collected and distributed via traditional means like postal mail, email, phone call, or even face-to-face meetings, or via non-traditional means like social media and online forums. But I would note here that if the feasibility of non-traditional means eludes you, you may want to stick with more traditional methods. Your survey results will be captured in the PSTS files that you submit to CALPADS. So let's look at those files. This slide contains a screenshot of the post-secondary status file type in online maintenance with the key fields, again, given an alphanumeric value. All right, so the academic year is the first value. It's given the designation of A on the slide deck here. And the PSTS file is the only file type that we report in Fall 2 where the academic year is not the current academic year. In PSTS files, we report the academic year as the prior academic year for a student who has already exited secondary education. We don't want to worry about ownership validations with the academic year because the PSTS file will compensate for those. So you will have ownership of the student record for PSTS files, although a student has already exited your LEA. Okay. There are fields in the PSTS file that aren't required for Fall 2. So those include fields like the reporting CELPA. We report PSTS records for special education students in end of year 4. And in end of year 4, the reporting CELPA is a required field. But for CTE students in Fall 2, this is not required. So reporting CELPA, local special education student ID, these are going to be fields for end of year 4 rather than Fall 2, and so we would not populate them in Fall 2. All right, you are required to populate the program participation type code in the PSTS record in Fall 2, and you're required to populate it as either 10 California Partnership Academy or 20 Career Technical Education. But for the majority of cases, this will be populated as 20 Career Technical Education. If the student is in a special education program, you could use this field to designate that. But again, the special education PSTS submission is in end of year 4. The post-secondary status code is also required in Fall 2. And this is where you'll enter your survey results from the survey that we sent out to our high school completers who were CTE completers. And this post-secondary status code will indicate whether the student is in college, AmeriCorps or the Job Corps, in employment, or multiple of these. If the post-secondary status code indicates college or any secondary or educational institution, you will need to populate the educational institution type code as well. And this is essentially an indication that, or the educational institution's tax status, whether private, public, for-profit, or nonprofit. And if the post-secondary status code indicates employment, you will need to populate the industry field that the student is employed in. And then finally, the post-high school credential would reflect any degree or certification or license that the student has earned after completing high school. If a student is both in college and employed, how would we report multiple post-secondary status codes? We would report multiple PSTS records for the student with one record indicating college and a second record indicating employment. The industry field would need to be populated for the employment record, and the educational institution type would need to be populated for the college record. And that is those are the key fields to the PSTS record. I think populating data in the record is more or less straightforward, but the survey and identifying the students to survey is the real challenge. With all 2 here. This is your PSTS record toolkit, which is the final thing that we're going to discuss when it comes to PSTS reporting in Fall 2. And there are a couple of helpful locations in the PSTS page of the CALPADS user manual where you can find guidance. The first helpful page of the CALPADS user manual is the PSTS survey template guide with the most updated PSTS survey template from the CDE. And you can download that from the CALPADS user manual here. The template has survey questions, and the user manual contains guidance helping you to understand possible survey choices and reporting survey links in PSTS records in CALPADS. And you can think of the survey template guide as your cheat sheet for PSTS surveys. And then for CTE survey reporting and the associated business rules, there's also a CTE survey reporting FAQ, which is quite helpful. And that, again, is in the post-secondary status page of the CALPADS user manual. I believe a lot of this information will also be in the Fall 2 reporting roadmap page of the CALPADS user manual. I'm going to send it over to Kyron now to give us a demonstration of error resolution of some common errors. But I see a question in chat, and I want to make sure that I can answer that here. So we have a question from Anne. It says, I don't understand the comment from steps to identify students to survey for PSTS for Fall 2. Make sure to run the completion status and exit reasons in 2 different steps to make sure that all of the students are identified. We run the identification in 2 steps because we run it with 2 different reports. So we have 8.1A to determine our high school completers, and then we have report 3.20 to determine our CTE completers. So in a broad strokes way, those are the 2 steps. We would use these filters for the first step for the report 8.1A to ensure that we're casting the widest net for our high school completers. And we would actually run the second report 3 times. So there are 3 steps in that second report field there. And we would change our filters for academic year and grade level there. Does that help to answer your question, or did I not get onto the right thing with the 2 steps? She says thank you. For now, though, let's go ahead and bring Kyron up to bat here to provide us a demonstration of some common errors in Fall 2.